Alright. Alright, acids and bases. We looked at the pH scale. pH means parts hydrogen. Okay, so pH is basically your concentration of hydrogen ions. If you have something that's considered an acid, it's going to release hydrogen ions, or H plus, in water. And the pH of an acid is between 0 and 7. The stronger acids will release more hydrogen ions. Okay, so once again, we're looking at our pH scale. Okay, we've got 7 in the middle, got 0 down here, we've got 14 up here. This right here is a strong base. This right here is a strong acid. Okay? Something like hydrochloric acid is going to dissociate very well in water. So you're going to be left with a ton of, let's do red, a ton of leftover hydrogen ions when these two break apart. Gives you a strong acid. Something like sodium hydroxide will dissociate and leave you with a bunch of hydroxide ions. So strong bases will have a ton of these left over when you drop them in water, and strong acids will have a ton of these left over when you drop them in water. Your pH scale is a logarithmic scale, which means there's a huge difference in numbers, okay? Because you're looking at concentration of these very small molecules, okay? You have to have a ton of hydrogen ions to get something that's considered a strong acid, okay? Something here, such as water, you can't see that. Here we go. When you drop water in water, okay, these polar bonds, these polar covalent bonds are so tight with each other, okay, this oxygen and this hydrogen do not want to let go of each other. So they're going to stay just like this. When you don't measure any hydroxide ions and you don't measure any hydrogen ions, then you have a neutral compound, such as water. Something that likes to stay pretty neutral is blood. Blood has a pH of 7.4. Okay, and that's your blood. Okay? Alright, good. Alright, again, our example was hydrochloric acid. We talked about bases. Our example was sodium hydroxide. Okay? Bases have a pH from 7 to 14. Something that you might be exposed to in chemistry later on is parts hydroxide. And basically, that's the opposite of parts hydrogen. So you're looking at the concentration of hydroxide ions here. Okay, it's a different scale. You might cover that in chemistry. But just to let you guys know, we're not going to use that. But all you would do is subtract the concentrations to find that. Okay, so something that's neutral breaks apart in water and releases the same number of hydrogen and hydroxide ions. Okay, so it either doesn't dissociate or it breaks apart in even amounts. Okay, our pH would be exactly 7. Okay, and of course there's experiments to define what a neutral range is. Okay, so again, hydrogen and hydroxide ions that are equal in strength are neutral, okay, considered neutral compounds, which means your blood has a little bit more base than it does acid, and it's considered a little bit on the basic side, okay? And here we go again. Now something else to keep in mind, okay, and just because you guys are awesome and you will definitely understand where this is coming from, it will help you later on. When we have a strong acid and a strong base and we react them, okay, these are going to create water. Okay, the leftover ions, okay, because they're completely dissociated, will form salt. Okay, so any reaction that's a strong acid and a strong base will form salt and water. Okay, this is very important in chemistry later on. Okay, we will talk more about indicators. Most of you guys have used these in the past. Okay, we might use them a little bit next week in our lab, but it's used to identify whether a substance is an acid or a base, and it changes color. It's pretty nifty. An example is cabbage water. You can use cabbage as a natural indicator. So here's a color scale. Again, you're not going to be tested on this, but just so you know. We'll have a nice deep red color if it's an acid and a greenish yellow color if it's a base. Likewise, you guys have used litmus paper before. They're red in acid, okay, and blue in base over here. So that's another good way to test pH. Some of you guys did that with your labs earlier in the year. Okay. All right. Water is a polar molecule, okay? So once again, when we have a water molecule, and we're going to do blue, we have an oxygen and a hydrogen, okay? Oxygen is greedy in this case. It's got 6 valence electrons. Okay. Hydrogen has an electron. And so for all of them to have a stable outer shell, the hydrogens are going to sit down here and share their electrons with oxygen. So we end up with something that looks like this. Okay. And this is where we get our Mickey Mouse shape in space. And it literally does look like this. It's crooked, okay, because the oxygen is greedy and it's stealing these electrons from hydrogen, okay. It's considered polar. It works just like a magnet. This right here is very negative, this side of the molecule. This right here is very positive because we have these exposed hydrogen nuclei, okay, with the protons over here, making this very positive. And this side is very negative because there's these free electrons, okay. It gives water some awesome properties. If I were to draw water molecules all over each other, these are covalent bonds right here, okay, that I'm drawing. Covalent bonds that I'm drawing. Water will also form bonds with other water molecules. Okay, again, these are covalent bonds. Okay, and then sometimes this hydrogen, they're trying to find other electrons because this oxygen's taking all of theirs. Okay, they're going to form bonds with the neighboring oxygen molecules. Okay, these bonds in blue are called hydrogen bonds. Okay, very important, and these give water some very important properties, again, that we looked at. Okay, a couple of vocabulary words that we will come to that you probably can go ahead and know now. Hydro meaning water, philic meaning loving. Okay, hydrophilic molecules love water. Hydrophilic molecules dissolve easily in water because they love water. A good example is sugar and salt. Hydrophobic molecules hate water. A good example is a lipid, or an oil or a fat, which are both lipids. Okay, so things that are hydrophilic are polar. They're magnetized and they're attracted to the water. Okay, because the water has a positive end and a negative end. Other things that have the same positive and negative end will be attracted to it literally like a magnet. Things that do not have a positive or negative end, such as an oil or a fat, are considered nonpolar and they do not like water. So keep that in mind when we go into things like cell membrane. Alright, so once again, a hydrogen bond is the bond forms between a hydrogen and a more electronegative atom. That's the oxygen in this case. Hydrogen bonds are very weak, okay? And that's why you can easily separate water. You can split water in half. You can share it with a friend and pass the cup over, okay? The water easily separates in half, but you cannot break water molecules that easily. Covalent bonds are very, 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 very strong. Okay, hydrogen bonds are weak. So here's a picture of some hydrogen bonds going on between water molecules. Here's an oxygen. These are, let's switch here. Here's an oxygen, and then these two are hydrogens. Okay, does everyone see this? So we've got our covalent bond, covalent bond, covalent bond, hydrogen bond, hydrogen bond, hydrogen bond, hydrogen bond. Okay, two different types of bonds here in water, and you need to know them. All right. The property adhesion is the ability of water to form hydrogen bonds with other molecules, and it basically means that these molecules are able to stick to things. An example is a straw in water, okay? The water can actually cling to the side of the straw and move up. Some good biological examples. This is the way that blood flows through the capillaries of your body. It also is the way that water moves up the roots of plants. It actually defies gravity and goes up the roots of plants and up the stems and things like that, instead of just sitting there and rushing downhill. Alright, cohesion is the ability of water to form hydrogen bonds with other water molecules. Okay, so it's not sticking to other things, it's sticking to itself. Okay. Water expands when freezing. We talked about how ice is less dense than water, and that's weird because most substances it's the other way around. The reason why this is important is if ice were to sink in the wintertime, lakes and ponds would freeze solid. Okay. Because they freeze from the top down, we've got this nice insulation, and all the living things inside won't die over the winter. Alright, water has a high specific heat. It has a very large capacity for holding energy. The specific heat, again, is the amount of energy it takes for the temperature of a substance to increase or decrease. Okay. And water has a very high specific heat, which makes homeostasis a lot easier because we're maintaining this balance. If water wasn't able to absorb this much heat, okay, then inside your body, all of these chemical reactions going on would definitely heat up your body. Okay, and those are some important properties of water. Okay, I will continue with this in the next lecture.